The Orville. Is it just another cheap Star Trek knockoff, or can it stand on its own merits? I certainly think it can, and I'm going to tell you why. I'm T-Rec87, and let's get to it. The Orville, for the uninitiated, is a new show from Fox, if you haven't actually seen the commercials already, starring Seth MacFarlane as Ed Mercer, a recently promoted starship captain with a ton of baggage. He's still recovering from being cheated on by his wife, who is Kelly Grayson in the show. And he is given command of a starship by what in this universe is called the Union, but basically it's like the Federation or Starfleet for those of you who watch Star Trek. And basically, they only give him this command is because they're running short on captains. The ship he's given command of, as most of you already probably know, is named the Orville. He's joined by a cast of quirky characters who you quickly meet. His best friend, who is the ship's pilot, is Lieutenant Gordon Malloy, and the only way I can really describe this guy is basically, he's the fleet's best pilot. He's a really great pilot with all the emotional maturity of a 12-year-old. Their chief of security is Lieutenant Ara Katan, who is a member of the Zalayan race. She's only 23 years old, so she's really, really young and maybe not quite ready for a leadership position on, a starship. But basically, she is a member of her race is from a planet that is super high gravity, and so whenever she's around somebody or on a planet or on a starship that has like regular Earth gravity, in comparison, she possesses superhuman strength. And because of that, whenever a member of her race joins the Union, they put him on a fast track to like a command position. There's also Isaac the robot, who I guess would be best described as the ship's science officer. And very early on, he lets the rest of the crew know that the only real reason he's there is that his race wants to know more about humans and everything like that. And he's really there just to observe their interactions and learn more about them. And this might actually be my favorite character, Lieutenant Commander Bortus. He's the second officer of the starship, and he's a member of the Mocklin race, and he's just a very large, stoic man. And the real kicker here, which I'm sure if any of you have seen the previews or commercials for the Orville, is that his first officer is none other than Kelly Grayson, his ex-wife, who basically gets assigned to the Orville. In the very beginning, you hear that she's assigned there due to a lack of other first officers in the fleet. It seems like the Union has a general personnel shortage. A little later on, you find that she actually requested to be put on the Orville because she felt bad for what she did and she wanted to try to help Ed Mercer out. There's also Dr. Claire Finn, who is the ship's chief medical officer, and she is honestly probably the most level-headed person on the ship, as well as the ship's navigator, Lieutenant John Lamar. I think this is a really well-rounded cast overall. The crew complement, just from an in-universe perspective, they all seem to have their own personal reasons or a unique, ability or trait or reason to be on the Orville. They're not just random people just assigned to the ship. They all seem to have like a reason for being there or a uniqueness to them that makes you want to have them there. Now, let me get into why I absolutely love the Orville. I'm someone who grew up watching Star Trek as a kid. My favorite series, honestly, I'm sure I'll receive a lot of flack for this, but honestly, it was Star Trek Voyager, and a lot of that was probably, it probably has like the nostalgia filter on, is because when I was younger and when I was growing up, that's what was on TV currently. And so I grew to love that show more than the other Trek series. I love the original series. I think it's great. Next Generation is amazing. I even loved Enterprise. I know there's a lot of people that didn't really care for that show. I thought it was really great up until the last season and things got weird. The only one I ever didn't get into was Deep Space Nine. And I know they did do exploring with the wormhole and they could travel through the wormhole and everything like that. I just always hated the idea of everybody being stuck on a space station. And so I never really got into that show as much. I've never watched it like all the way through. I've watched a lot of episodes just kind of like here and there and just, segmented chunks. But I'd have to say that's the least favorite series of the Star Trek continuity. But as far as the Orville, I was not excited to watch this show. When I saw the commercials on TV, and I think Fox did a really poor job of this, really all they did was present it as a Star Trek knockoff. All I really felt it was basically going to be this show with, Seth MacFarlane and co. just trying to be super funny and witty like all of his shows are. in this B-rate Star Trek knockoff with their super cheap ship, and I just thought that's all they were really going for. And in reality, it was just that's what I thought. It was just going to be like a cash grab. I would definitely like to go on record and say that honestly, like, I was very wrong. Now, before I get into why I like the Orville, I just want to say the Orville does have some faults for sure. I mean, the acting, nobody's going to win an Oscar on the Orville. I'm sorry. As far as the first few episodes I've seen goes, it's not great. There is some really, the jokes are hit and miss, and it seems like they're really trying to find their niche. So that's one thing. The effects are pretty passable for a TV show, honestly. But when you compare it to something like, say, I don't know if any of you guys have seen the new Star Trek Discovery, but I actually went out, and I will be doing an episode about this later. But Star Trek Discovery on CBS's All Access, which I ended up paying for, is amazing compared to the Orville. In comparison, when you watch Star Trek Discovery and then you watch the Orville looks like a 5-year-old might have animated it. So, there's that. There's definitely a disconnect there. When you see the show, you're like, wow, this looks like it's maybe from the early 2000s. And like I just mentioned, I don't think that this show is particularly funny. I don't think that it's this show's strong point yet. It seems like, like they're trying really hard, and there are a couple moments in particular that I laughed really hard at. I thought the comedic timing was great, but most of the moments, especially between Seth MacFarlane's character and the first officer's ex-wife, I think a lot of those scenes kind of tend to fall flat. Now, I know it seems like I'm definitely making the world's worst argument so far as to like why you should watch this show, but just stay with me for a little bit, and this will all come together. It'll all come full circle, and you guys will kind of understand what I'm talking about. The entire charm of this show and is really, honestly, because of what I just described, because this show's not perfect. It really gives this show a lot of character, and that's a lot of the reason why I've fallen in love with it so much, is that, the effects are just barely passable. The acting's not great. If you've ever seen an episode of Star Trek, there's obviously your good guys on the ship, the main characters, and they are clear-cut good guys all the time. They're perfect, they're enlightened humans, or whatever race they are. And then there's bad guys like the Borg or the Hirogen or Klingons or whatever, whoever the bad guy of the week might be. There's always like this clear-cut line, and that's not really the case with the Orville. The characters definitely are not perfect. While you might occasionally meet a bad ship or a bad human here and there, or just a bad character here and there, the crew of the ship of whatever show you have to be watching is clearly always an enlightened one. These people don't really generally deal with, greed, jealousy, or honestly making any sort of crappy decisions that really have any negative effects beyond one episode. Or generally speaking, they'll find some way that during that episode, the character will be absolved of, whatever misdeed they did, and they'll find a way to make things perfect again by the end of the episode. And that's kind of the Star Trek's thing most of the time, is that, at the end of your show, at the end of your episode, everything's all sunshine and rainbows again. In its first 5 episodes, the Orville has taken a real stab, I think, at some pressing issues that affect our society today. I mean, within the first few episodes, and really within the first few minutes of the show, you're already, dealing with infidelity, who Kelly Grayson's character, obviously is caught cheating on her husband, Ed Mercer. And, she is immediately framed as a not good person. You basically, at the very beginning, you only see Ed's side of the story. And then actually down the road, when you see a few episodes in, she was the type of person that was in a relationship where she wasn't receiving what she needed. She wasn't receiving any of the comfort, the affection, the encouragement from her significant other to make her feel valued in the relationship. And you learn that that's what drove her, to doing what she did. And so she did have an actual motive for it. And, obviously while it's wrong, it shows a very human side to both characters. You see at first Ed Mercer's side of the story where, like, God, she's just evil and he hates her. And then you see her side of the story, and I think it kind of humanizes them both and gives them a lot more depth. And that's what I love about this. These people are flawed people. They're not perfect, enlightened people. They make mistakes. They make shitty decisions. And that's something I think that is, in comparison to something like Star Trek, I personally think that's great to see. You know, they handle their problems poorly. They deflect them with, they deflect their issues with humor or sarcasm, or even go so far as to making bad decisions, or when confronted with a situation, they go, to hiding behind alcohol and basically trying to drink it away, And so I really love the fact that they've really done with these characters. And while some of it might just be, for comedic timing, or, just to have that laugh in there, I think a lot of it, honestly, like I said, is to give these characters some personality. Now, I cannot express to you enough that you have to watch at least the first 3 episodes of this show for it to get going. The first few episodes really are just introducing you to everybody and kind of giving you an idea of how the rhythm of the show is going to be. And the first few episodes just aren't that great. They're not amazing. They're kind of boring. But, I mean, once you get past those first few episodes, the show really takes off. Now, what I want to talk about in particular is the 3rd episode, and I don't want to give it away for those of you that have already seen it, so I'm going to try to talk about this episode in very careful terms. I don't want to give away any major spoilers, but just so you know, if you are considering watching the show, maybe you should stop watching this video, and maybe you should go watch the show instead, because I hate to give that episode away because I thought it was so good. Basically what it deals with is that we find out Bortus, the ship's number 2, that really large stoic man that I was talking about earlier, you find out that him and his partner are actually having a child, and that's something you didn't really realize for the first few episodes. And his race, they end up having an egg, and they have to incubate it and take care of it. And so for that episode, for the majority, you see that he is, well, I guess the episode before too, that he is kind of away from the front lines, and he's taking care of this, this egg. Now, when the egg hatches, you quickly learn that the child has a birth defect. And I use the term birth defect because basically what the child is born with is something that is atypical of someone born in the Moclan society. Now, the crew, they don't see anything wrong with, what the child is born with. And they really, obviously they see that what she was born with, she's unique and she's different, and that's great, and they think that's something to be valued and respected. But Bortus and his mate want to have a surgical procedure done to make their child basically conform to the standards of the Moclan society. And so this episode gets into a great conflict here of, these two parents wanting to do what they think is best. These two parents don't want their child to be an outcast in society because, they'd hate to have their child, and anybody who else is a parent would obviously, understand that feeling like, yeah, I don't want my child to be shunned by society. That sucks. But there's also a lot of people out there who are like, yeah, you were born different. That's amazing. That's great. So it's a really interesting dynamic here, and you see 2 different schools of thought both being explored, and I think that's really awesome. This episode honestly really hit home with me. I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen any of my other videos. I know I've mentioned I have kids before. I've got 2 boys. I've got identical twins. And as far as like a societal thing goes, they were definitely born unique and differently from other people. Especially when they were very first born, my wife and I would go out to the grocery store, and people felt compelled to, like, I could see it, from like a ways off. You could feel eyeballs on you, and I hated that getting stared at because my kids were different, because it wasn't something that was normal, and it really, at first it really bugged me. Like, I wanted to punch everyone who stared me out, honestly. It really pissed me off. I just wanted to say, like, hey, leave my kids alone. Or people that would come up and talk to us would, or want to, like, talk or look at our kids or whatever. They would, question, like, oh, are you going to put them in the same clothes and this and that, and at least they'll have the same tastes, and the same likes and dislikes, and that can't be farther from the truth. My kids are completely different, obviously they bear a physical resemblance to each other, they're identical twins, and they look almost exactly alike, and a lot of days I call them the wrong names. I feel really bad about that. I'm sure they'll see this video someday, and sorry, but they have their own unique differences. And so this, like I said, getting back to the episode, this really was something that I personally could relate to. This is something later on as the episode goes on, you find out that Bortus ends up having a changing heart for his child, and he wants his child to be able to make their own decision on whether or not she wants to have that surgical procedure to appear normal to the rest of the Moclans, or, if she wants to be different, which again, I think is really great because, to me, as a person. Like I said, when my kids grow up, if they want to wear matching clothes every day for the rest of their lives, great. And if they grow up and they decide that they absolutely hate each other and they want to move to opposite sides of the country, also great. I mean, not as great personally from a parent perspective, but also great. That's their decision, and I want them to feel free to make their own decisions. And Bortus ends up feeling the same way. He wants, his child to be able to make her own decisions and be her own person. Now, what ended up happening in the episode is that basically a tribunal for the Mocklans gets requested, and this is a little bit before Bortus ends up having his change of heart, but basically they're end up going to the Mockland homeworld to have a tribunal because the ship's doctor refuses to perform the operation, and so they're going to the Mockland homeworld to decide the fate of the child, basically on whether or not the child should have the operation. And Bortus finds out this basically through a really touching moment. I don't want to give it away too much, but I guess I can talk about it. Basically, he ends up watching a movie with two of the other shipmates, and they're just, sharing a couple beers. And they have this unique moment, and the movie, honestly, is the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. It's the cartoon, the stop-motion animated cartoon from, forever ago. It's really old. But basically, he ends up seeing that, Rudolph, while he's teased by these other reindeer, his uniqueness ends up actually serving a great purpose. He ends up being super helpful to everyone, including Santa Claus, and then everyone ends up loving him, and he's celebrated for his uniqueness, and that's what changes his mind. And so by the time they get to Mockland, the Mockland homeworld, he is on the side of, let her decide when she's older, and his partner, still wants to have the operation. That's as far as I'll go with it, I promise. I'm sorry for talking so much about it, and I don't want to spoil it for you anymore, but it's such a good episode. Like I said, the writing may not be the greatest, the acting may not be the greatest, but the episode itself is amazing. And you guys should definitely take a look at that episode in particular. And I feel like that this show, isn't afraid, especially in these first few episodes, and I hope they keep it up. This show isn't afraid to deal with social issues, and it isn't afraid to go places that other shows may not necessarily want to tread water on, and I think that's awesome that they're trying to do this and make a social commentary in their own way. A lot of the gripes I had with the show, I think, will fix themselves in time. I think the cast, genuinely hasn't had time to bond really necessarily. They haven't quite gelled together yet. The acting may never recover. Seth MacFarlane, he's a great voice actor, and he does, great stuff with like Family Guy and everything else. I don't know that he's the best actor in the world, like as far as like maybe he's just not used to being in front of a camera yet. Maybe he's a little iffy about that, because it is kind of a strange thing, I think, to have him actually in front of a camera trying to be genuine and give genuine emotion with like his facial expressions and stuff like that, versus having to just do it no microphone. As far as the animation of the show and the technical aspects, like I said, most of the time they're fine. There are a couple missteps here and there where I just was like, whoa, that was horrible. And those things may or may not go away in time. Maybe they'll figure out better ways to do it. But those are all really, I think, minor gripes when you're looking at the bigger picture here. I think the show is really stuck between two things here. It's really stuck between trying to be a comedy and trying to find a lighter air to things. And it's also stuck between trying to actually make a social commentary and be relevant to, people today. And I think it's really a big thing of the show is it's trying to find its footing, trying to find its place in there. They can't be too heavy-handed and, be overly dramatic. They need to keep some of that comedy in there, but at the same time, they don't want to make a show that is just an irrelevant piece of fluff. And I really, deep down, I have a deep admiration for what they've done here. This is not just as much as like the PR people or the execs or whoever at Fox that wanted to portray the show as just like I want to use the word as like safe. It's just like this fun, lighthearted comedy where it's just like a romp through space and everybody's having a great time. There's really a lot of depth to the show, and I really hope that they keep up with that. I hope the show doesn't fall into a trope or get pressured by Fox to just write like these thin plot lines and storylines you know, and just for the sake of a chuckle or a laugh. I really hope they keep going this route and exploring societal issues and trying to make commentary on them and trying to get people thinking about them. The Orville is trying very hard to be its own show in its own way. It is not trying to be a clone of Star Trek. And I personally hope that they eventually end up getting there. That's it for this episode, guys. I really hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I hope this persuaded you to at least take a look at the Orville if you haven't already. For those of you that have Hulu, it's on Hulu, so you can catch up anytime. And I think it's on, it's on Fox on whatever day of the week it's on. And I don't really know, and I'm not going to go look it up. Sorry. But I want to know what you guys think. If you guys have already seen the Orville, I want to know what your thoughts are about the show. Or if you haven't seen it, like I said, are you going to go take a look at it? And I hope you do, really, honestly. And when you do go watch a couple of episodes, come back and tell me what you thought. Do you think it is a really good show, and that is trying to find its footing, or do you think it's like a bunch of crap? I'd love to hear arguments for both sides. I love reading opinions and people having other insights that are different than my own. Or people that like to play devil's advocate and maybe have a completely opposite opinion of mine. I would love to hear that too. If you guys did like this episode, please hit that like button. I really appreciate it when you guys do that. It helps out me and Typhlight85. And if you're new to the channel, if you're just watching like the first episode for the first time today, remember to subscribe. That way you can come back to the channel whenever you want. And if you hit that little notification bell, you'll get alerted whenever Typhlight and myself upload new content. We try to post pretty much every single day. We're, basically Monday through Saturday, barring something coming up in our lives that, we need to, if both of us has something going on a certain day and we can't make an episode, that occasionally happens. But we try to be pretty consistent with our schedule, and we try to pretty much do Monday through Saturday all the time. So you can also follow us on Facebook or Twitter. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Like I said, I really appreciate you guys watching the episode, and I'd really love to hear what you think. So I hope you guys check it out. I hope you have a great day, and I will talk to you again soon.